Open the podcast doors, Hal.
It's Kubrick's Universe, the Stanley Kubrick Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Kubrick's Universe podcast. We'd like to introduce a new 13-part series coming from the mind of our very own Mark Lentz. The series is called Thekatria Kubrick, which is in the format of a roundtable discussion hosted by Mark Lentz, moderated by James Robert Sherman, and populated by members of the SKAS Academy. Now, the SKAS Academy do regular online meetups every Saturday, and they chat Kubrick. This is the first of a 13-week series in which each of Kubrick's feature films will be discussed in chronological order, starting with Fear and Desire. This is Thekatria Kubrick. Fear and Desire is a 1952 American independent film marking Stanley Kubrick's directorial debut. The film opens with an off-screen narration by David Allen.
There is war in this forest, not a war that has been fought, or one that will be, but any war. And the enemies who struggle here do not exist unless we call them into being. This forest, then, and all that happens now, is outside history. Only the unchanging shapes of fear and doubt and death are from our world. These soldiers that you see keep our language and our time, but have no other country but the mind.
This sets the stage for a story set during an unspecified war between two nations. Four soldiers find themselves stranded behind enemy lines following a plane crash. Their journey involves building a raft, encountering a general, and breaking into an enemy-held house. They also have an encounter with a young peasant girl, leading to a tragic turn of events. Now, before taking on Fear and Desire, Kubrick had, of course, worked as a Look magazine photographer and directed two short documentaries, Day of the Fight and Flying Padre, in 1951. These experiences encouraged him to venture into narrative feature filmmaking, prompting him to leave his full-time job with Look. The screenplay was crafted by Howard Sackler, Kubrick's high school classmate. The film featured notable actors Virginia Leith, who later appeared in the cult classic The Brain That Wouldn't Die. Jan in the Pan? Anyone? And Paul Mazursky, who of course would later gain recognition as a director in his own right. Funds for the film came primarily from Kubrick's family and friends, with support from his uncle, the owner of a profitable pharmacy. The production team comprised 15 individuals only, including actors, crew members, and Mexican laborers who assisted with equipment and transportation. After premiering at the Venice Film Festival as Shape of Fear, the film found its way to U.S. theaters through distributor Joseph Burston. Renamed Fear and Desire, it carried the tagline, Trapped, 4 desperate men and a strange half-animal girl. Initial reviews, including an uncredited one from the New York Times, acknowledged the film's experimental nature, but noted its overall impact. Following its initial release, Fear and Desire went through a period of obscurity, with rumors even suggesting Kubrick's attempts to destroy it. Through Warner Brothers, Kubrick issued a statement that severely downplayed the film's value, and he called Fear and Desire, quote, a bumbling amateur film exercise, end quote. However, some copies of the film remained in private collections, and it later resurfaced during a retrospective screening at the 1993 Telluride Film Festival. Kino Video released a DVD and Blu-ray in 2012, and it was released again the following year by British company Eureka Entertainment as part of its Masters of Cinema line. A recent announcement by Kino Lorber stated that a longer version of Fear and Desire has just been discovered. It runs 70 minutes instead of its original 62, restored in 4K by Kino Lorber in collaboration with the United States Library of Congress. We now present to you this conversation, which was recorded on September 9th, 2023.
Well, so let's start by going through everybody. I will call on people and just give some thoughts about your current viewing compared to earlier viewings. Just a few thoughts from everybody, and I'll just call you in the name you're on my screen. So, Brian, you go first.
Well, this won't be as in-depth as Bob. I think a couple of things. The timing of it doesn't work, but in the very beginning, in those opening scenes, I almost saw a Twilight Zone episode, because Twilight Zone was famous for doing these things where they were in these anonymous places. And given the timeline, this was made before that, but so it kind of echoed some of the better Twilight Zone pieces that I remember and liked. That said, to me, it's very uneven. I kind of saw it as an interior monologue of these four distinct characters very early on war and their different, I don't want to say desires, because that's a pun, almost their motivations. So you had the guy who had kind of the sexual obsession. You had the guy, the leader, who's kind of challenged with leadership decisions. You had the guy, I mean, it's almost like four aspects of war, but very, very uneven. And in terms of what psychologically that does to people, with all the continuity errors, if I saw one more shot of the two guys walking outside the German headquarters or whatever it was, I mean, he must have spliced that in 10 times. It did have the first, I would say, to be fair, it had the first Kubrickian stare, although it was very early. And ironically, it's a woman, which never happens again in his film legacy. So that was mainly it. I mean, I think, it's interesting film angles and things of that nature. I'd have to look at other films at that time to see how it was. But I think maybe why it caught some people's attention was, it wasn't so much an A to B to C story. It was almost more of an interior psychological monologue, which with these four characters set in this anonymous place. And again, I'll go back to like a Twilight Zone episode. And from that standpoint, I don't know how many other films were being done at that time that were so abstract like that. That kind of became more in the 60s and 70s, I think. But I don't know how much in the 50s and 40s that was being done. There's other people here who are probably better film historians than me. So that was mainly it. But it's very uneven in the character development. The Paul Mazursky character kind of goes totally off the charts. The other guy, who I guess just wants to kill, and his thing about Mac, it's just uneven, but I kind of can see like the four thoughts and the four personalities and the four interior like desires or drivers that perhaps war psychologically impacts people. So that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Brian. And in this first go round, let's just let the person talk. Although Bob, if you want any clarifications, you're allowed. So Mark McKay. Oh, right when you're taking a drink.
Of water.
Intrigued, disappointed. I'd seen it before a couple of times, but not in a long time. And this is the first time that, in light of everything we've discussed and all the things I've read and YouTube clips where you see various iconic moments from other Kubrick movies, this was sort of painful. You saw the prototype of Kubrick's later techniques. You saw most of it there. But he was very unsure of what he wanted to do. The acting was wooden. Character and scene blocking was terrible. The dialogue was left a lot to be desired. I didn't know whether he was trying for a straight up melodrama or some sort of allegory. The lighting at times was very interesting, very good. Took some time to figure that out, particularly the sequence at the end, towards the end. Shot a lot of it day for night, so what looks like nighttime scenes is probably really shot during the day. It certainly was shot during the day. A couple of the moments were cringeworthy, so full disclosure, I sort of buzzed right past those for a minute or two. Particularly Paul Mazursky, who's a character I never thought was really well developed. I thought the other people had some interesting angles, but I never completely got a handle on him. It just wasn't clear. What I really felt was that Stanley was sending himself through the Stanley Kubrick film school. He was sending himself to film school to figure out how to block, set up a camera, light. He was winging it at times. How can I? If he only knew half then what he had learned in only 3 or 4 short years thereafter, it would have been a much better movie. But absolute kudos for a completely miraculous transition from a substandard, what would be a standard movie for everybody else and is clearly substandard Kubrick, but in only 3 to 5 years between Killer's Kiss and Paths of Glory, you're talking about a quantum leap in just about every filmmaking technique that he could muster. Not only, of course, he had more money, but he was much more thoughtful about blocking and camera audacity and symbolism and metaphor and how to get a lot of out of actors without even having them speak. No dialogue whatsoever. But in this movie, it unfortunately was kind of a wash. But I do give a lot of credit for having the courage to go out there and do it in the first place. And some of the techniques were, I saw he was trying, but I saw that there wasn't any money to do it better. And there were a couple of continuity breaks. And no, the girl was really pretty. I couldn't buy why she was tied up against the tree like that. It didn't seem that was an important plot point or story point, and sort of seemed a little lame, almost amateurish. But it's intriguing. It's definitely an interesting experiment for proto Kubrick. To that, thumbs up, kudos.
Thank you, Mark. Wow, well said. So, Stanley, go ahead.
Kudos to Bob Castle. Kudos to Brian and Mark, because I think the two people who just spoke truthisms. I kept thinking of the word, we all know where Stanley went after this and Killer's Kiss and The Killing, etc. So I kept thinking of the word primitive when I watched this. My wife was sitting next to me this morning while I watched it, and she said something like, "This is not very good." And I said, this is where he was at the time. Mark just used the word courage. And I had read somewhere that Stanley and his buds at the time thought of themselves as geniuses. So my guess is they thought they were Superman and they could accomplish anything. So he's taking his success from Look magazine and the little shorts that he did prior, and he's jumping into this as a next step thinking, well, I'm going to hit a home run. Well, we know in comparison, this was not a home run. Did it take courage? Of course it took courage. Who has hit a grand slam? Who has hit a home run or a grand slam first time out of the box? I'm not sure. Would you tell me? You guys know more than I do about this universe. But I kept thinking of the word primitive. The opening narrative that you never hear the narrator. You hear the narrator, but you don't see him. I think we're getting a glimpse of Stanley's thoughts about the nature of man, which of course comes up in every one of his successive ventures. The music was very interesting to me, and David may comment on that a little bit later, but I kept thinking of 80s TV shows. Brian brought up The Twilight Zone. Now, obviously, this was way before the 80s, but the music changed dramatically over time in his films. Interesting that the film was in color, yet there were a couple of shots that were kind of sepia, full-face sepia. He was experimenting in this film, and we all know the path that he took. Mark McKinnon did a post on Facebook today about the scene from 2001 where the ape is holding the bone in the air and says, Mark said something along the lines of, "There's this scene will, stand on its own forever and ever." And I agreed. But the scene here where the soldiers, the four of these guys, attacked that first cabin and then ate the food, and basically they were going after them for the food because they hadn't eaten. And that reminded me of the scene where one group of aggressive apes attacked the other group of more sedentary apes who were just minding their own BI business at the time. So that's where my mind went. Was he prepared? Did he keep that in mind to reappear later, that kind of aggression? I thought that the character Sidney was very interesting. He, of course, was the one who went mad, and he kept referring to the magician. And the term magic came up again at the end of the film. Do you remember of course, you remember the dog who was one of the main characters in the film, and the dog's name was, come on with it, Proteus, right. So I have heard the name Proteus before, but certainly didn't remember who it was. So I looked it up. So Proteus was a mythical god of rivers who changes easily with the flow of the water, who changes form, as it were. And that made me think of Stanley and his philosophy and human nature, which he dabbles in this film. And then I jumped to some of the scenes in all of his other films, including the culmination in Eyes Wide Shut, where he gives us glimpses of what he called his final masterpiece. And we still think that it's unexplored because we know that something else is coming that theoretically could open it up even more. Everything changes. Stanley keeps giving me hints about his belief in the concept of uncertainty. And I think that he scoffs at everybody else who takes a position of certainty about anything. I'm done for now.
That is also excellent. Boy, I had no idea we'd be finding so much meat on this very slight movie. Good job. Mindy, what are your thoughts?
Hello. I love the Twilight Zone. Because I really got that feeling too. I don't have as many deep thoughts as you guys. As I said, I just finished it for my second time about 2 minutes ago, so I'm still compiling. what I did like about it is that it is, while it's not a perfect film by far, it's a great precursor of what we're going to see in the future, particularly in Paths of Glory. And so that's why I always find it fascinating to watch a first film, because you'll see what they're going to grow into, and a lot of times because of money or opportunity, a first film is usually, I'm going to throw everything at the wall, because the director doesn't necessarily know if he or she is going to make another film. So I think he had a lot of ideas that were not necessarily fleshed out, but as his career goes on, he's going to definitely flesh out a lot of those ideas. One of the things I'd like to ask, because I was confused, was the whole plan at the end. I thought they were supposed to take the plane, but then they take the plane and then they're not in the plane. And I didn't know it was so. If someone can explain that to me later, I appreciate it. I wanted to also comment. Someone was saying that this seemed experimental for the 50s. You can see other films like this, but you're going to have to go to low budget B movies in the 40s and 50s. So I'm looking at, a lot of your film noirs. There's something called Detour, which is a kind of subversive film noir from the 40s with Edward G. Ulmer. And another one I can think of that I'm just not thinking of right now. Oh, Samuel Fuller is a director who did a lot of oddball stuff in the 50s and 60s, etc. So that was my second. And I also wanted to say, for someone who said first movies out of the park, I would say, and it's probably because she had a dad who helped her out, but Sofia Coppola, her first feature, The Virgin Suicide, I would say was pretty much a home run for first movies. But I agree, it's very hard to do, and it probably helped. Their dad was Francis, and she probably had the money to do what she needed to do. But other than that, I mean, I'm glad I watched this, and I like the whole idea of the inner monologues and people trying to come to terms with who they are in this world, and why they're doing the war, and why do we hate, why do we kill, and why do we desire, why do we fear. And so again, if he had more time and more money, he would have fleshed it out. But I think it's a really good start for a great career that's going to come ahead.
That's great.
Mark, I wanted to say,
yes,
regarding Mindy's comments, two things. Actually, even though it wasn't his first film, I think the comparison to Detour is pretty apt. It's a rough film. It probably is ultimately better executed because it wasn't his first film, but it was made for less money, I believe.
I didn't say it was his first film. I said it was.
I know.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know if anybody else did. That's what I think. But he made the film for less than Fear and Desire. Supposedly it was 7,000, but I think it might have been up to 20 or 25. But it just seems that film it has a little better structure and movement. Plus, he's in a genre of sorts too, in the film noir genre, that helps. The second thing was, actually, about the same time Fear and Desire was made, Samuel Fuller did two movies on the Korean War, The Steel Helmet and Fixed Bayonets, almost the same time. Now, they're specific to it. In fact, it was fairly brave to make a movie about the Korean War in 1952, seeing as it wasn't over yet. But anyway, I thought the reference to Fuller and Detour, I think, is apt.
Thank you, Bob. And yeah, Bob is our guide for this movie, or whatever, facilitator. Just very quickly.
Or sensei.
Stanley, I noticed you must have watched the colorized version.
I guess I did.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. Yeah.
There's a colorized version? Okay.
Yeah, on YouTube. Well, it's not native color, so let's be clear.
I should have gone straight to Criterion, but it popped up on Prime, and I just stayed with it.
But Mindy's point about see, I didn't know about these other. That's interesting to know that there were other experimental filmmakers at this time, because that's what it seems like. That's what I was sensing, but I didn't know who these other people were. It sounded like he was part of maybe that group or those younger filmmakers that were trying to like push the envelope differently.
Just not part of the studio system. When you weren't part of the studio system, you had a lot, you didn't have as much money, but you had a lot more freedom. Absolutely. Oh, and just so you know, there's a website called justwatch.com. So if you're looking for where to find a movie, just one word, justwatch.com, and it'll list all the, so that's how I was able to know it was where it was. And it'll show whether it's rental or free, but at least it gives you some ideas of where you can find things.
Thank you, Mindy.
You're welcome.
Okay, we're up to Nick.
Hi, guys. So, it's really hard to unpack because there's so little really to work with. What jumped out for me, and I listened to the YouTube interview with Stanley about him approaching his first feature film, and the fact that he thought that the script was rather pretentious, and that he tried to make something out of what wasn't really there. And so one of the things that I felt took away from the film was the narration. I think writers, even myself included, sometimes we try to get an idea out and you're better off showing it than narrating it. It depends on what your purpose of the narration is. I also felt that I just didn't think there was anything at stake to really care about. And, I think Stanley in the interview speaks of the fact that he's not an actor. He's not an actor's, he was never an actor, and he's not an actor's director. So he was trying to find something out of nothing. And I think the budget, he said there was people were getting millions of dollars, and so he figured out he could get 20,000 to make this film. So I said to myself, I was actually left with more questions than answers, because you could see there's some genius in him early on, even through his mistakes. One of the scenes that stuck out to me was that he was trying to do a multiple cut murder scene without showing any gore because of the censorship rules, I'm sure, at the time as well. And he failed at doing that. But interestingly, and I've never seen it in any other movie except Psycho, where the great Hitchcock, of course, did it correctly. So I'm wondering, did Alfred Hitchcock actually take that from Stanley? Or, I'm not sure. It left me with more questions. Then the other thing I noticed was that there was the theme of the hostage. And of course, that was played by his ex-wife, who was quite attractive, by the way. I never really saw her before in any movie, of course. And it reminded me, so he's trying to give a theme of I guess it was some type of sexual repression. I mean, these guys are out and they find this woman and they're going to, tie her up to a tree. And then I think he's trying to show that he was going mad. And you see that as a complete theme many years later, which I think is one of the most underrated films ever made for war, and that was Casualties of War with Michael J. Fox. So I was wondering, if you're a writer and you're looking towards the past, even for films that didn't work, might you pick up themes to expand upon and make good? So that's another thing. And there was also a really cool shot when I forgot the gentleman's name. One of the soldiers died, and he hits the step with his head, and you don't really see that. So you see that Stanley's trying to develop his artistic sensibilities. Albeit he's failing, he's trying, and certain things look. I would give him a shot, as my point, with a higher budget after seeing that work, because I would say, well, he didn't write it, but he certainly can expose a picture well. And he certainly has an idea of what he's doing. Let's see what he can do with a better script. So I think that's the reason why he probably got better deals, besides his business acumen, which we all know about, and develop a career. Because a lot, in today's day and age, I don't know if someone makes a film at $20,000 and gets to make another film when it's that, poorly done in the grand scheme of things, he didn't have as much competition. I would assume. I could be wrong, and I'd like to be corrected if I am. But nowadays, everybody has a camera. The budgets are quite low, and they're making content, but they're never getting to the next level with a better script by another writer if they're just a director, and a higher budget. So that's what stuck out to me. And finally, what Stanley said about a writer, a director coming out of the into the batter's box and hitting a grand slam. It has been done very few times. I mean, Sam Mendes, though, was from the theater, and he knew how to block just from working in, I think he did Cabaret for TV in '93. And so he had a sense. So, I think Stanley did a great job in making something out of nothing and learning his craft and still putting something together. So it shows that he had some type of, what a great intellect we know, but some type of general sense of what should be done to make a film. And that's what I got from it.
Oh, really good, Nick. Everybody's doing great. One correction, his ex-wife is in the film. She's one of the 3 women in the stream. She's the left.
Oh, okay.
That's it for corrections.
Okay.
James Sherman.
Well, let's see a few things. First of all, Robert and Mindy took my Sam Fuller stuff, so that was it. But I did have one thing to say on the Sam Fuller thing, and it kind of glides into something Stanley was saying. Was when Sam Fuller's films came out, the intelligentsia was somewhat dismissive of his works, okay, because they saw him sort of as a Hollywood hack, and he's making sort of pedestrian films. And I think that there was an element, because like I said, I mean, it's like Steel Helmet, which I think Robert, you were mentioning, and I think that's probably the most significant influence on Fear and Desire was Steel Helmet. I mean, you just look at the exterior scenes were actually shot interiors, but the thing is, it's like the whole mise en scène is definitely what Kubrick was trying to do. I think Kubrick was going to attempt to make an intellectual version of Sam Fuller to a certain extent, and he didn't work. He did not have the experience of Sam Fuller as a filmmaker at that time. We'd mentioned that, I think Mark McKinnon mentioned that it was like a student film, and it's definitely his student film. And since all of us who've ever made first student films, we've burned those. So Stanley Kubrick tried to burn his, and that seemed to never work. But interesting aspect, though, is that for all of its flaws, and oh my God, it has flaws like there's no tomorrow, right? I mean, it's like, I think Mark McKinnon touched upon that, a couple other people touched upon that, is that, it's like, my God, when we see what he just did, I think, in his next film, which was The Killer's Kiss, which was much better, more accomplished, okay? So it really does show that Stanley Kubrick learned a lot from Fear and Desire, that he learned that the whole experience was absolutely necessary, and everybody, I think, I think pretty much sees that idea, that it just, it's like you saw what he learned from Killer's Kiss, and then of course from The Killing, which I think is just a quantum leap above Fear and Desire. I mean, that's like saying suddenly, he's playing Little League, okay, with Fear and Desire, and suddenly he's in the major leagues batting 300, okay, when he made The Killing. Because I mean, it's just, The Killing is just a great film, right? And it's like, so you see what he learned, okay? The things that Mindy, you mentioned the whole sequence about, the plan was that he was that Frank Silvera's characters, Mac, right? Bob, Robert, Mac. Mac's thing was he was sort of to distract, right? Okay, the beach house in La Jolla, right, where the generals were, okay, and basically, and basically, so that the officer and the other guy, okay, could get onto the plane and escape. Okay. And then, but of course, it's like they pause after Frank Silvera sort of shoots at everybody, then gets shot, right? Okay. Then they pause and they go and kill the general and his officer, basically the two same characters, right? Or the two same actors, right? And it was interesting to me that, that kind of was really, that was a mistake. That was just, I think they didn't think that thing through. And that was one of the flaws. But some of the things that I really liked in the movie, was, first of all, it's an important artifact in film history in the sense that this is Stanley Kubrick's first film. We do see things, even images and shots, that he was the intercutting he was attempting to do, which he would go on and do much more brilliantly in his career, obviously, and learn better on that. But the intercutting and the close-ups, and like you said, the Kubrick stare, which was by I can't remember the actress who played. She's just this girl in the credits. It's interesting. Everybody has titles, but she's girl or woman in credits. And one of the things, and I did like the attempt. It didn't work, but I did like the attempt with the creepy stuff with Paul Mazursky and the assault and the sexual assault sequence. I really think that was like something he would refine. Crazy. It was the first time Stanley Kubrick tried to express crazy in one of his films, and obviously it's his first film, and it didn't necessarily work, but I really, really loved the attempt that he was trying to do, that he was trying to do something different, that he was trying to do something in a much more interesting way, and just the very creepy way by which Paul Mazursky's character was done. And I just thought, I don't know if it worked completely. It didn't work completely, but I think it really, really, I love the attempt. And the thing is, it showed that this was a guy who was attempting to reach for more than he was capable of doing in 1952, right? That he was better able to, I think the psychological aspect of his films was better. Obviously, he became a master at that, right? But so anyway, I did like the film for the certain things that, that did work, that at least affected me, and I saw what he was going to do going forward. One last little bit interesting trivia was in the movie, as Frank Silvera Mac is talking to the officer.
Here I am. I'm 34 years old. I've never done anything important. Nothing. When this is over, I'll fix radios and washing machines, and they'll say, "Good boy, Mac." That's all.
And what's interesting is poor Frank Silvera died trying to fix his garbage disposal, and he got electrocuted. He was in 1970, right? Because and I was like going, "Oh wow, what a precursor, a synchronicity of some sort." So that's just a trivial thing, But
James, why would you ever know that?
Incredible.
Why would you know that?
Because he probably read IMDb. That's what you find out in IMDb.
I actually
love that stuff.
I actually did not. This comes from, I'll tell you the story.
Sounds like he had a fan club. Were you like a stalker?
James Goldner was my film professor at San Francisco State. He was a guy who he's an excellent documentarist. He was an excellent professor. He was just an absolutely brilliant professor. He knew Kubrick back in those days. Back in the 70s, he was a kid at UCLA, right? And the thing is, it's like he knew Stanley Kubrick, he knew Paul Mazursky, he knew who was it?
Backler?
Joe Turkel. I'm sorry, Joe Turkel. He knew Toba, Kubrick's wife, and stuff like that. So there was all this group that he hung out with, right? And so basically he was like, and he knew Frank Silvera. They were friends. And so it was like when in film school, he showed us this first time I saw it, and it was on a crappy version, but he showed us a videotape of Fear and Desire. And so he said, my friend Frank Silvera passed away because it was like, and then but I didn't put the connection until I saw the movie, Mark. And then I said, I fix radios and washing machines. And I go, oh my God, that's what's going to kill him, right? So that's how I know that stuff. And my brain just is neurodivergent, works that way. So anyway, but I just thought I'd throw that in for a little bit of trivia. But I just want to mention is that how important this film is. I totally understand why Stanley Kubrick wanted no one to see this. Because this man made gigantic works of art, some of the greatest works of art that humans ever created, right? And he's got this lousy student film, that, so I could see why he would want. This is a reason why I don't show people my student films. I totally understand that. So anyway, but like I said, Mark, I'd like to add, and Mark's got his hand up here, so maybe he can have a question here. But yeah, we're getting a lot of really good material on a film that really, it's just not that good a film. Okay, but I don't think it's a horrible film or a lousy film. It's a great artifact to see the beginning. It's like sort of maybe seeing Picasso's first paintings. Something like that. So that's my take on
Excellent, James, and an amazing story. I'm so glad that came out. Awesome. Mark, do you have a quick observation before we go on to Bob?
Yes, just to turn it quickly back to Sam Fuller and Kubrick for a second. We want to compare war movies or war-themed movies. Sam Fuller was the master at it because he was a World War II combat veteran. So if there's anybody ever in a movie, directed a movie, who knew how to shoot a movie sequence, with a war movie sequence,
absolutely,
Sam Fuller.
Absolutely. Big Red 1 is one of the greatest war films ever made. Brilliant.
Absolutely. So is Merrill's Marauders.
Yeah, Merrill's Marauders.
And so
Steel Helmet.
That's a great movie because he did it with no money and he still did rock your ass combat sequences in that.
Yeah. Anyway,
and the other thing I'll say is I think Nicholas touched upon it that I didn't mention earlier on was one of the themes that I think very strongly comes through very early on. It's not really explored, but it's sort of like put out there, is the thing that Kubrick was always exploring later on, and that's the concept of duality.
Right.
Dual behavior at the same time. Even the trick that he does where I think he was both trying to save money on his cast, obviously, but also make a statement about, sort of existential, because he's got those characters that are doubled up. And it's a little confusing, but it also serves a very strong thematic purpose that's reflected later on in Kubrick's work about duality. And
do you think it was duality and not just totally budget driven? Because I really thought it was budget driven.
I agree with Brian. Yeah.
Could be.
I'm going for duality.
Now, that said, the magic does happen in the editing room, and he always said that. So maybe there's truth to that.
Not in this case, but yeah.
It's not that.
Nothing in the editing saved. He got really, really good at editing after this. I mean, really, really good. So, yeah. Anyway, sorry, Mark, let's, who's next?
Bob is next. Bob, pretend you're not the moderator.
Well, I'll mention a few things. We'll start right up with the duality. I'm totally in on the duality. He's already done this with the twins in The Day of the Fight. And it's something he's pursued throughout his films. I mean, it comes up all the time. The doppelganger, double, what have you. But I think it also fits into the theme of when the opening narrative about the thing taking place in the mind. And I had done a presentation earlier about, which I called Kubrick's Interior War. And it pretty much stemmed from watching this film, and especially that scene, and seeing how in his war films, it seems as if the side we're watching, the French, the Americans, seem to be killing themselves, or when it comes to execution or estimating how many men will die when they're attacking the anthill. In fact, we see very little of the enemy in his films. But we get soldiers who are being killed by their own people. Dr. Strangelove, they're helping the Russians knock out the planes that are attacking. So this theme continues, and I think it works well. And it may have satisfied a budget issue, but I think it works. And the connecting tissue is the dog. They meet the dog in one of the opening sequences, and then later the dog's in the cabin with the general, or the house. The other thing is, one thing regarding Sidney's breakdown actually begins when they kill the soldiers eating the food. I mean, he's a little strung out maybe before or anxious, but that is his snapping point. So by the time, probably the real issue is why'd they leave him to guard the girl? He was obviously not. I think that's where Mark saw the absurdity of that scene and such. And I think there's something to be said for that. But I have to admit, I love that scene. It's so off the wall. Stuff he's talking about, it's almost surreal.
The assault scene, Bob. I'm sorry.
When Sidney's talking about the magician, I mean, he's just going on and on.
Right.
It's almost humorous in a way, maybe unintentionally. And he also has the Kubrick stare at some point there, while he's looking her as she's tied up. And also, when he brings his hands up to her, it's a lot like Alex when he's in front of the crowd and he has his hands right near her breast and he can't touch them. Sidney does a similar thing. In fact, I think he's on his knees when he's doing this. So that echoed a future scene. And one thing I didn't worry about, I'm not worried about whether it's a great film or not, or, he made it, okay. I don't think we should feel it's like an abscess on our appreciation of Kubrick. I mean, he did what he did. And he did, I think he had an issue in Killer's Kiss also regarding the soundtrack, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe we'll find out next week when we deal with this, but I think he had an issue there with the production or the final thing with Jake. Let's see. I felt the scene where Max on the river, as much as it seemed absurd, him going down the river on the raft, I have to admit that I'm captivated by the river shots and going back to the interior dialogue. This movie totally reminded me of Thin Red Line and how the approach there is that's an interior monologue festival. So and Kubrick used narration before as well. He began Paths of Glory with it. He began Strangelove with it. And he has a whole movie of it for Barry Lyndon. I guess if you don't like narration, you skip Barry Lyndon. The film didn't bother me in terms of its, failures or whatnot, or potential failures. To me, it was just seeing how these, he definitely, I was looking at some of the films. Yeah, I didn't see the list I gave you of films, first films. I don't think there were any home runs, so to speak. But this film, when it came out, made some money. It didn't I think he recouped some of the money when it came out. And the other thing about his suppressing the film, I think he suppressed this long before he was an established filmmaker. I think he began to suppress this film not far after making this film. So he wasn't, I've made Barry Lyndon, I can't let people see Fear and Desire. I think this was early on, and there's a lot of speculation as why he did it. It's definitely an approach he never really uses again, I would say. That's what's really different. And maybe just hit a wrong note for him, is it embarrassed him for whatever reason. I guess he's entitled to that. So I'll stand by my defense of Sidney, I guess.
All right, really good, Bob. A quick comment from Stanley before we move on.
2 quick points here. Everybody's got to start somewhere. We know where Stanley ended up. The scene of Mac on the river, didn't he verbalize or didn't he internalize that he was willing to give up? We know that he served as a distraction for the other two to get away on the plane, but didn't Mac look at himself as giving up his life to take out the German general?
It sort of goes to his obsession about the general as well.
Exactly. but he was willing to give up his life for it. So on one hand, that speaks to, call it the good nature of man, as opposed to the other nature of man.
Thank you, Stanley. I'm just interested in how differently people, the different things that people notice and how they process things, which is coming across really well in our individual statements. So, Kathy, what are your thoughts?
Well, this was the second time I saw it. And I think when you go in with low expectations, like my memory of watching it the first time was, can we just get through this? But actually, with that low an expectation, I found some things interesting about it. I thought the kind of overlapping internal dialogue toward the beginning when they're walking up the hill and each one has separate thoughts about what's going on here and, separate feelings. I found that interesting. And I found a few touching moments. Like Stanley was just, I think it was Stanley's comment about Max on the raft, right? Anyway, as Max is on the raft, is approaching, coming to the point where he's going to have to start taking action. He thinks something like, no more Sundays, no more anything. It's like it's this sudden transformation from I'm ready to die because life is not going to be worth anything anyway.
No more Sundays. No more 1,000 things. I'm a little scared, though. Just a little. Like kissing my great-grandmother when she was dying.
And there were moments like that where I sort of thought, I'd like to hear a little more about that, as opposed to, oh God, can we get this over with? Also, I saw a colorized version, and at a couple points, I sort of forgot that. And I was thinking, wow, that's really an interesting background, an interesting palette to pick for this kind of scene, and then there'd be the, oh, wait moment. Like this is colorized and it's not even well colorized, right? So I'm not dying to see it a third time particularly, but I found it a bit more interesting the second time around.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yeah, sure.
David, your thoughts?
Hello. I think this is the second time I've seen it. I might have seen it 3 times. This time around, I was interested in the characters' dialogue within their own minds, and I thought that there's a lot to discover in how those are written and how Stanley was maybe seeing his characters and his own intellectual approach to it. Again, the editing I thought was interesting because you start to see some of the things that he wanted to express, and some of them are awkward, but those are the beginnings. I did have trouble with some of the dialogue, trying to distinguish between the different characters and their thought patterns. But it seemed like this is because of the first time of making a film. I did notice there was quite a bit of difference between the way the soldiers moved in this film and how they move in Full Metal Jacket. Is just quite a difference. And also Stanley said something about the music. It seemed like the music was done in certain ways that did add to the film. And the composer or whoever wrote the music or orchestrated it seemed to be mature, to have a good grasp on what they were doing with the music. And it seemed like Stanley chose this kind of music up to and use that kind of music for the next two films. And so I thought that was interesting in itself. I did notice a bit of a Twilight Zone connection. I just got the Blu-ray collection. There's 156 episodes, and it's pretty extraordinary. Rod Serling wrote 92 of the shows, so but I always wondered if there was kind of a connection between Rod Serling and Stanley. But in one of the interviews, Rod Serling does compliment Stanley on how the opening of 2001 was portrayed by the apes without any dialogue. So, but I would watch this film again just because of the certain points and some of the points that others have brought out in today's discussion. So I'll just leave it there.
That's great, David. And Bob, I imagine you have a comment on the music.
Well, you mentioned that the man who composed it, Gerald Fried, who also, I was just looking up his, he has a long list of credits, but his first four are with Kubrick. And he did Day of the Fight, then Fear and Desire, Killer's Kiss, and The Killing. And I know The Killing, I felt he really is at a top form there, I think, early in his career. But
Bob, didn't he go to high school with Gerald? And then there were like three people that worked on these first films that I thought were all part of his high school class. But maybe I'm wrong.
Now
let's see here.
I thought he went to high school with Gerald in the Bronx.
Oh, he's born in Manhattan. Let's see.
Yeah, they were all buddies very early on.
Oh, maybe it's the Washington Square connection.
No, it's the Bronx.
That's what I thought.
Anything else, Bob, before we...
No, that's it. I just wanted to mention Gerald. Give him his props.
Thank you.
He did do Paths of Glory also. Gerald did. James, you are next.
And first, forgive me, I'm French and don't used to speak English every day. So forgive me if I make mistakes or if I use basic words to express my ideas and my feelings. Please forgive me. But I love this movie. So yeah, I don't want to take too much time. The time is passing. But there's a lot of things to say. Like maybe one last thing. Nobody thinks about the opening credits and the engraving or the drawing behind. Were like paintings, in fact. And you need to play, to interact with the movie, to you turn your screen and it's a painting of a face to mimic the body on the ground, Paul Mazursky or the woman, and in fact it's a painting of the woman in the opening credits.
Oh, James, I hadn't noticed that. I had not noticed that.
Also, it's a good thing that Nicholas mentioned the connection between the shower scene in Psycho and the murder, the first attack scene in Fear and Desire. Because if you really think about it, it's clear that Sir Alfred Hitchcock, hated this scene from Fear and Desire. And in fact, it's more deeper than that. Because behind the story of Psycho, I think people like to use have easy understanding of a movie. But when you see Psycho, at the ending of the scene with the psychiatrist, you need to feel better after the shock of the cave, the scene with the cave with the skeleton of the mother, and you have a rational explanation. But what if Norman Bates wasn't crazy or mad, but was possessed? There's a theme about being possessed in Fear and Desire, because Robert Bloch, who wrote the novel for Psycho, was a close friend to Master Lovecraft, who are behind the story of the Call of Cthulhu and all the ideas of the Ancient Ones, esoteric ideas, all that stuff. Okay, so.
Well, thank you, James. You're making some very interesting connections, and also about the way Kubrick's mind works. That does connect Eyes Wide Shut. So let me get my little.
And I was just going to say, I also want to say, James, don't be embarrassed about your English. You speak English better than some people in the United States.
Oh, thank you.
better than me. So
yeah.
But it's difficult because Stanley leads us to complex territories, who gives you complex thoughts who are difficult to express with words. Because it's like he said, the truth of a thing, it's not about the think of it, but to feel it. When you see the connection between the birthday of the birth of Stanley Kubrick and the death of Lili Schnitzler, you don't have to think about it, you have to feel it. That's what I want to say. Okay.
I wish Ian was here, because he sees these kinds of connections as you do, James, and they're very interesting. Let me just give my observations. First of all, I did see this in the theater, and watching it on YouTube is not nearly as good. The strengths of the movie are the compositions, the cinematography, and the music. And that part is so shrunken down on the computer. In the theater, the ending scene was very emotional to me because of those elements. Things I noticed on this viewing, there seemed to be something about drawing with sticks in the dirt. There's that map in the beginning drawn by the captain, and then the Silvera character keeps pushing a stick into the dirt during the whole penultimate scene as some kind of quirk that he's having. I think it's only 16 minutes long, and yet to me, I feel like he didn't have enough coverage for that 60 minutes, so he's forced to reuse some shots. He has the girl uses the same shot over several times, then he flips it over just to have stuff there. I did like, for filming, I was watching his filming technique when they have, again, Silvera. Is it Frank Silvera? When he goes out, yes, when he goes out on the road himself to see if it's clear, the fact that the camera stays behind and we see him go forward, that's like in Full Metal Jacket. I thought that was a nice technique. I was puzzled by the aspect ratio, which is almost square. I've never seen that aspect ratio in a Kubrick film. In Photoshop, it says it's 5:7. I also noticed vignetting in some of the shots. So that's where you get a black circle around each of the four corners. And that happens when you've got the lens at the far end of its zoom, say. A lot of the acting did make me uncomfortable and squirmy. And I thought Mazursky and Vincent D'Onofrio and Full Metal Jacket, it's like they go so far that it does make me squirm. It's uncomfortable to watch. So yes, with the reused shots, I felt like Kubrick did not have much time to prepare, or he didn't think he needed to prepare. And then he had very limited time shooting. And so he didn't have that many shots to choose from when he was editing, and I think he reacted against that in his later films. He always did multiple takes, as someone was saying, not to find this moment of genius, but just to have a whole lot of choices on what to use in the editing process. So I think when he got back to this to edit, he realized he didn't give himself much leeway with what he did on scene. And I thought, as we've brought out, there's a lot of themes that show up later in Kubrick, and he's not afraid to look ridiculous, to go all the way out there. But when he says you need to make it interesting, that's a reason for many takes. He didn't have time to do that on this shoot. And when he says the director is an idea and taste machine, again, I don't feel like he had enough time to come up with some good ideas and the taste to choose what was best, or maybe he just didn't have the options. I didn't see any genius in this the way I do in his later films. So those were my thoughts. And Mark, you had a comment?
Further to your point about sticks in the dirt, there's three shots, or maybe at least two anyway, when they're having the lieutenant is digging in the dirt with when he's leaning against the tree and talking to Frank Silvera, Max. He's facing kind of this way, and Silvera is over there to his right, but hidden away, his left hand has a stick that is digging in the dirt. There's a medium close-up on it, and it's never explored as to why he's doing that. Is it releasing tension? Is it some sort of a quirk? There's no context for it. So there's that as well. Yes. So that could be a theme, but it's not explored. It's not explained. It's just a quirk.
It sticks out, so to speak.
Sticks out.
Yes.
So let's
Mark, I agree with you. There were a lot of I don't think he had a lot of coverage, and I just think he repeated a lot of things and just had to throw the kitchen sink, which is kind of ironic because by the end of his career he was doing 1,000 takes. So this is kind of the yin and yang of the progression of a filmmaker.
Well, it was cool because the cut that I watched was rated at 106, almost 107 minutes, which is 67.
Mine was almost an hour, like an hour one.
So
That's what I thought mine was 61, but again,
I have 1 hour. The YouTube version I watched has 1 hour and 6 minutes and 50 seconds. So that's.
Did you watch the color or the black and white?
Black and white.
Ah, okay.
So it's the director's cut.
Yeah.
The
only thing I would say here is in Kubrick feeling like embarrassed by this, or I don't know, his ego, whatever, wanting to burn it, is that he would later go on to say that, you young filmmakers should get a camera, go out, shoot, do everything, learn everything, edit. And that's what he was doing. And so it's almost like, I would have, you could take a spin either way, but I would have said, that's what I was doing. I was doing exactly what I would preach to someone starting out today if he was still alive. Take a camera, go out and shoot. Christopher Nolan preaches this from his early films. I mean, it's the only way to learn how to make a filmmaker and do all the different pieces of it. So I find it, other than, I guess, ego, perhaps, for him to have had such a hostility toward it, knowing that it's essentially a student film or first work.
Thanks, Brian. So we're running up against the clock, surprisingly, with this movie. But let's go back to Bob, because he did such a great job with the handout. All those links were great, Bob. Do you have some things you want to bring out to us?
Well, one thing is, probably one of the best pieces I've read about the film. It's in The Philosophy of Stanley Kubrick, edited by Gerald Abrams, and it's called The Dialogue of Fear, in Fear and Desire and Dr. Strangelove. And the basic approach is to look at the first film as human beings alone. And in Dr. Strangelove, she looks at the collective and how like we have like sort of not archetypes, but generalizations of people in Dr. Strangelove. Here, we get the typical war film, get the, different soldier types and such. I thought the interaction among the soldiers was pretty good. And it's gone into somewhat in this article. It's the first one in the book. And I found the constant, I would say, tension between Mac and Lieutenant Corby was consistent throughout. Mac sort of, felt that this guy wasn't being realistic or had his, mind in the clouds. And to some extent, I mean, that's his character. He's sort of somewhat distant. I mean, the other character, Fletcher, is sort of doesn't have much to him, but and he doesn't stand out compared to the other three. But I found the interactions between Mac and Corby pretty interesting. Like I said before, I'm not that worried about it being a failure or whatnot. I don't think I watch stuff caring about that. That is to say, I got to watch this because it's a great film, or people tell me it's a great film. Well, no, if I want to see it, I'll see it, or I'll need to see it. Or I have confidence that there's going to be something there. And to me, this is I think a primer into, or I'd say the incipient Kubrick is being shown here. I mean, I think we named enough things where we see how they're developed later on. And, I mean, it's part of his psyche. He may have, the one that we mentioned this before, where Corby says after the plane flies over, I think it's the second time the plane flies over and doesn't see them or the raft. He says, what are they doing up there? Read magazines? And here we have Slim Pickens reading a magazine in the bomber. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, obviously he didn't do the first line anticipating the later one, but and I guess this is part of the, for a filmmaker or a writer, they can have these things in there, and it doesn't matter if you detect them or not. I don't think it's going to affect ultimately the meaning of the film to the viewer. It just becomes more satisfying when you discover these little things. I don't think it, the remark by Corby, suddenly makes Fear and Desire, a visionary film. It just. But and the other, I'd say the one scene that leaves the biggest impression, I think it was mentioned when they kill the soldiers that are eating. I thought some of the shots there where they're stabbing him, and what he shows is them. I think one guy has an orange, and we see as the guy is dying, the orange is crushed in his hand. I mean, that is, I think, incipient genius. I'll put it that way. I mean, I think that really works. It really is effective in terms of, and you talked before about how in the film he tries to do things without showing, like, I think of the general who hits the floor, the porch floor, and some of the, and the mention of Psycho and people being stabbed, but we don't see them being stabbed. But I think the use of the orange and the food, and the fact that they're eating the food afterwards, that left probably a fairly big impression on me, this viewing.
My only question, this is really for Bob. The screenplay was with Howard Sackler. How much of this was Howard Sackler and or Kubrick? Because they both went on to have Hollywood careers, obviously.
I don't know Sackler's work that much to pinpoint. Oh, this is Sacklerish versus.
Yeah, that's kind of my question.
We would be better. I think the group would probably, senses the Kubrick touch. Again, did Sackler write the screenplay for Killer's Kiss as well?
I have not gotten to it. I haven't gotten that far.
According to one of the articles, Bob, he worked with him on Killer's Kiss.
So he was part of this little
there's where
posse of people early on with him.
Well, I think if he wrote Killer's Kiss, that would give us some way to compare what it would seem to me. I don't know if it went through it. I'd say, let's see. I mean, whatever Sidney's saying is probably Sackler. I think Sackler just, was in free form there.
Imagery, no doubt, is Kubrick. I was just curious at this point, how much Sackler might have been. And it's interesting that these guys were kind of I said posse before, that they were this group that kind of came out. I assume Sackler came out of New York, but I don't know. That came out, and they were probably all similar ages, trying to embark on their careers.
I wouldn't be shocked if the interior monologues were to Sackler. But
all right, Mark, and then Stanley.
Yeah, something that Bob mentioned, the shot of the food, the plates of the food. That's the most dynamic editing in the entire piece. And that kind of exclamatory cut on action editing. I can think of two other times he ever did that. One is when the Moonwatcher discovers the bone, and you get those quick shots of the falling animal and the quick shots of him smashing the bone onto the skull. That's similar editing to Fear and Desire. And the other time he ever did that I can recall right now is in A Clockwork Orange during the opening fight sequence. He cuts on action, and it's very quick and dynamic. So it goes along slowly and slowly and slowly, and then there's this explosion of action, and then it returns to a more sedate pace. So he's done that at least two other times in later movies. And I think that it was, in this case, it was deliberate rather than him not having enough coverage. He cut it together like that for a reason.
Good point.
Awesome, Mark. You did a great job today.
Thank you, Mark.
Fantastic.
And Mindy, welcome.
Mindy and James.
Honestly, it's nice to have a female perspective on the Kubrick film, just because his films were just so male oriented for the most part. Actually, ironically, it's kind of ironically till the very end of his career, where there was a significant role for a female actress. But putting aside Lolita.
Oh God, that's
very kind of that's that in itself has issues.
Well, thank you for listening to my perspective. I appreciate it.
No, please come back. Please come back. Yeah. And James, please come back, sir. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Everybody, see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye, Nick. Bye, Kathy. Bye, James.
Bye, James. Bye, Mark.
David.
Everybody. Bye.
Our very special thanks to Mark Lentz and James Robert Sherman and all at the SKAS Academy. Brian Kahn, Mark McKinnon, Stan Dorfman, Mindy, Bob Castle, Nick LaMattina, Kathy Metzger, David Sukhavati, and James Phillip. We will be exploring Kubrick's second feature film, Killer's Kiss, from 1955, in an upcoming episode of Kubrick's Universe as part of our Thekatria Kubrick season, conducted by Mark Lentz and the SKAS Academy. Okay, and check out our two Facebook groups, the Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society and Kubrick's Universe. We also have two great YouTube channels, again, for the Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society and Kubrick's Universe. If you get a chance, head over to patreon.com, search Kubrick's Universe. You can offer your support for our podcast so we can keep bringing it to you for as little as £1 English pound or $1 US doll hair per month. On behalf of Stephen Rigg and myself, your humble narrator, Jason Furlong, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you soon.
It's Kubrick's universe. We just live in it.
We have taken very thorough precautions in this podcast against broadcasting anything which might only be attributed to human error.
These guys aren't scientists. They're making it up as they go along.
Thank you for listening to the Stanley Kubrick podcast. Come back soon.
It was real nice talking to you. Bye. Over and out.
This show comes to you from the Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society.